Hi everyone. Today I'd like to talk to you about primary application versus secondary application. It's not something that, it's something I think I've talked about it here and there at workshops and things like that, but it's not something I've sort of put down as this is something you need to know on video so that everyone knows. And I don't see a lot of other people talking about it, so I think you'll find it interesting. Basically, what it means is a primary application is something that, a technique that you learn, a technique that will work in the majority of situations, okay? A secondary technique is something which, it's a really good technique. It works very, very well. But it only works in a very specific scenario. So essentially that's why we call it secondary, because if you learn, let's say when you first start training in martial art and you learn 5 basic techniques, for example, to train and learn how to fight. So defensive and offensive, 5 basic techniques, whatever they are. If they are all secondary techniques, you might think in training, like, oh yeah, this works really well, I can take that block really well and put that punch in, it works really well. But that scenario which it's working, the way the attacker is throwing their punch, the scenario you're creating in that particular training method is highly unlikely to happen in a real fight. It might happen. And if it happens, then you've got those moves up your sleeve, so they're good to have as backups. But because it's very unlikely for that situation to actually occur, you shouldn't be starting with those secondary applications as your primary focus. We want to look at primary applications. They're not necessarily simpler, easier to do, or anything like that, but they're more likely to happen. The situations where they work are more likely to happen in a real fighting context, whether that be a street fighting self-defense situation, a home invasion, a domestic violence, or an MMA competition. Doesn't matter, the rule still applies. Primary techniques basically work all the time under the majority of situations. Secondary techniques, you need to know when to use them. So I'm going to bring Fran in and show you what I mean by that. Okay, so a primary technique could be anything like just swinging a punch in there, whack, something like that. That's a pretty simple thing to do. It's a very common type of attack, and stepping out of the way and punching it there, that's pretty simple, right? Or, I don't know, I could do same punch there, I could barge into it and attack somewhere here. Very simple things that will happen commonly. She might throw a straight punch, so a straight punch with that hand. Something like that, and attacking here, for example. So they're common attacks and they're simple, effective things that I can do that will work 9 times out of 10. Okay? Right, so a secondary technique is really I think everyone knows really what a primary technique is, but secondary technique meaning the technique only works in a small certain scenario. Okay, so I'm going to use one of our techniques from the small sansao to demonstrate this point. If you come over this side, if Fran throws a low punch down here, and I do this double block, so I'm not going to explain the technique, but those of you following our system, you will know this block very well. So for starters, it's a double-handed block. That already makes it a secondary technique for most people. If you're a very small person, someone like Fran or even smaller, then a 2-handed block might become a primary technique because you're that small. I personally have never trained with someone who I need to use 2 hands against. I can always stop any attacks they do with 1 arm. So therefore, double-handed blocks are a secondary attack for me because it's very unlikely that I would come up against someone big enough that I would need to use 2 hands. However, even if you're small enough, keep in mind that a crossing off block like that, we call it a pung hinge block, it's still sort of a secondary technique even for a smaller person because I'm going to attack you. Where are you going to put your hands? Like guarding sort of thing, right? Most people are going to keep both their hands up like that. it's very rare to see someone have this kind of a guard, okay? Your Philly shell guard from boxing, or our pung hinge guard, or the old man stance from Taiji. Simply because it's more difficult to defend yourself from that position. Having both hands up, it's easier to protect yourself. It's a more simple thing. Hand down, there's other things you can do from that situation. So if you learn how to use this, it can be effective, but this block can only work from this position. See, when I've got one hand down, I can take the block. If I've got both hands up, I first have to drop my hand before I take the block. Or perhaps she throws one punch one way, I do something there, I've already blocked the hand now. Now she steps in with a heavier blow. Okay, now maybe I can use it. That's the scenario where that block could work. But now it's the follow-up, more so, that I want to talk about. So she's thrown that strike, right? You've got your guard up, you're gonna hit me and throw attack at me, so bang. What's the most likely thing she would do next from this position? Look where her hand is. It's right there. It's aiming directly at my face. If I've just done this block, that punch has a direct line to my face. If I try to now, just do your 1-2, do your punch. What's going to happen? You see? Those of you that know the technique, blocking, stepping in, and taking a back fist and controlling the arm. So there's no way that this block is going to be able, a technique, the full technique, there's no way it's going to work if she's coming in with a 1-2. It physically cannot work. My timing is 1-2. Her timing is 1-2. Okay, they're both the same speed. The only way you could maybe make it work would be to move 10 times faster than how she can, but you can't assume that you're faster than her. She might be very, very fast. So the times when you might be able to use this technique, it's a really nice technique. If you've found yourself in that position, boom, it's a really good little back fist. It's very, very nice. But it can only work if she's not intent on throwing that punch. If she is intent on throwing that punch, this would be regarded as a primary technique. If you do the 1-2 again, see, that would be a simple 1-2. So that would be from that block, the primary version of that particular technique. Whereas from the block to the back fist is a secondary technique. So where would that secondary technique fit? When could I do this? As I said just earlier, when she's not trying to hit me with this hand. So how do I know she's not going to hit me with that hand? If I'm standing here, I've taken the block, well, her hand's there. So as soon as I move, she could smack me in the face, okay? So there's two situations where it might fit in. I'm sure there's other situations, but I'm just going to give you two examples where it might fit in with this particular technique. So she throws that attack. Now this will look a bit silly with Fran doing it because she's smaller than me, but if she's a big thug and just using brute force, like poor technique I'm talking about, she's landed that punch, but she pushes force into me. Just really, like she's trying to knock me over, which some people do. They'll throw a punch and just sort of hold that pressure. So from there, she's holding that force on me, and we're assuming she's bigger than me, of course. So hold that pressure on me. Holding that pressure, if I now try to hit her with that hand, keep the pressure, push the pressure, push. If I try to hit it with that hand, you see, I've let her knock me over, because by trying to strike her, I've collapsed my guard. Now, I'm sure there's other things I could have done. If she's holding that pressure on there again, push the pressure on. From there, I could move around it and go. There's other things you could do as well, but just to give validation to this particular method. If I feel that pressure, boom! That's where I can hit her with that hand. It's nice and direct. Because she's applying force with that hand into me, it means I know she's not trying to hit me with the other hand. So essentially, if she throws the punch and applies force to me, okay, I'm going to maintain cover with that hand. Bang, 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 whatever. Hit her with my inside hand. If she throws the punch and releases force, so you don't maintain the force, as soon as I feel that force release, I assume her other hand is going to be doing something. It might be low, it might be high, but that hand's definitely coming in because she's gone that way. The logical thing is to come back the other way. So, of course, that's what I'm going to use the primary technique of covering with this hand and attacking with the right hand. Another scenario where the back fist strike might work nicely. If she does the old boxing thing, if you throw the strike, but you bounce back. You know, a boxer will sort of come in and go back, but with this low punch. So bang, you see, I'm a little bit out of range. So really jump back though. But yeah, that's it. That kind of attack. You see, that's going to be difficult for me. Do it again. Boom, what? You see, I'm going to be out of range with that. Whereas still in that same position, look, that's got more reach. So there's more chance I hit her. So when she thinks she's just coming back to being in a ready position, she does it again. Boom, you see? And I'm going to attack her. I'm following her with that particular technique. The fact that she's going like that means, again, she's not attacking me, so I know I'm safe. So I'm using my longest reach weapon. And I'm using it in a direct manner. Because in order to throw a straight punch from here, of course, because I'm turned to the side, I'd have to sort of pull it in and then throw it. Less quick. Not as quick, sorry. So from there, that's the longest reach and most direct attack that I could do. And that is a common thing. People do it. They'll throw a strike and then sort of bop back. They'll what? And bop back. Maybe they don't even throw a real punch. Maybe you go to do that hinge block, but maybe I sort of go like, and then come back with something else, you see? Maybe I'm not even throwing the full punch. I'm sort of doing it as a feint, and you go down, and then you throw your attack. So you see, that's just to give you an idea there of primary versus secondary. That's just one example, but I think you get the point there. If it's something that only works in a small percentage of situations, it's more likely in any given situation that I'm going to go do that low block, bang, whoom, or bang, boom. You know, it's more likely that, or bang, grapple, or whatever. It's less likely that I'm going to throw a low punch and bounce back. From what I've seen anyway, you typically see that more from if someone's throwing a jab and bouncing back. It's rare you see a committed body shot and then a bounce back, but it can happen. So if that happens, the back fist is a great technique for a secondary technique. It's a stupid thing to do, to throw a strike and then maintain pressure, but it happens. I've had it happen to me several times when people are sparring with me. They'll just keep that pressure on there. And because they're keeping that pressure, it might not be in that technique, it might be in an upper technique, or it could be anything. But by I'll use a different technique because they're maintaining that pressure. If they were to release that pressure, I'd be more likely to do something else, one of the primary techniques. So you can apply this idea now to anything that you practice. All the techniques you have, you want to be able to say, okay, let's say, so for this particular technique, you've got to throw that punch, I do whatever, and do this, whatever the technique is. Then say to yourself, right, is that likely to happen in a real life situation where someone's attacking me? Whether that be competition or self-defense. Is it likely to happen? Is a professional fighter likely to do that? If you're looking at ring fighting. If you're looking at self-defense, then you can ask yourself, okay, is a thug someone who doesn't really have good training, but they're just tough and hardened and they can throw hard punches? Are they likely to do that? Is that situation likely to come out? If it's not, then that's a secondary technique. So by all means, don't throw it out. It might give you the edge, the upper hand. But your primary techniques will work 90% of the time. So when you're beginning, you want to take, your 5 or 10 basic primary fighting applications and drill those, train those until you know how to fight. You know how to defend. You know how to read strikes. You know how to move and land your strikes. You know how to fight. You're comfortable when someone's training with you. They've got gloves on. They're swinging punches at you, and you're remaining cool and collected. Okay? Then it's time to say, right, okay, but what if this weird, funny situation presented itself? Maybe one of these secondary techniques then will help me out. So just have a think about that, whether you practice my system of Tai Chi Chuan and Baguazhang or any other system that you do. Just have a think about that concept. Oh, one other thing I wanted to mention is when you see a technique done by another school, something completely different than what you do. Of course, there's always the chance that a technique can be total crap and it would never work in any situation. I'm not saying that there's, value in every single technique. Some of the techniques you see on YouTube are just completely ridiculous and there's no chance they would work in any scenario. But for the most part, there might be a certain little angle you get to where that might work. So therefore, to practice it isn't necessarily a bad thing so long as you understand where it would work. So like the techniques I showed with Fran, the small sensor technique, for example, that one. If you go around practicing that, thinking this is a good, solid primary technique, and you drill that all the time, and that's all that you practice, well, you're practicing secondary drills. You're not practicing your primary drills. So the small sensor sort of has a mix of the two. Don't automatically think that's a crap technique, it would never work, just because you think, but the attacker would never do that. Well, you can't say the attacker would never do that because you don't know who's attacking him. See, in a professional fighting match of whatever style, you can have a pretty good idea of what those people are going to do. They're not going to do things that would be deemed really poor technique because they're professional fighters, okay? However, in a self-defense situation, anything can happen. The vast majority of the time in a self-defense situation, you're dealing with someone who doesn't actually know how to fight. They have very poor technique. So you could exploit that poor technique rather than just fighting them like you would someone in the ring. When they make one of those mistakes, rather than just using your good solid boxing techniques or something, when they make a mistake, you can exploit that mistake by having one of these secondary techniques. But yeah, golden rule, don't make secondary techniques your primary fighting system. If the majority of the stuff you train, you go in your head and you say, well, actually, yeah, okay, if you threw that punch, the most likely thing you'd do next would probably be this or that. So in which case, my technique doesn't work against those obvious attacks. It would only work if you did this weird attack. You see what I mean? So yeah, that's all I really wanted to say. Hope that's made some changes in your mind. If you've got any questions, please feel free to comment down below and I'll answer when I get a chance. Yeah, be very interested to hear what you have to think. What you have to think, what you have to say. What you think when you say it in the comments. Thanks.